Hi, this is Congressman Cole. This is another one of our congressional chats. Been a very busy week in Congress this week, and honestly, a very successful week. Let me talk about a number of the things that have happened. Probably the most important thing on the House floor was what's called the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. It is the big defense bill. It's something that Congress, in a bipartisan way, has passed for, I think, 63 straight years, over 60 for sure. And it's an area where the two parties tend to come together. Now, it's the House version of that. We still have the Senate version to pass, and then they have to get together, and then we have to pass together the final bill and send it on to the president. But it's a huge accomplishment, and certainly in the House it was done in a very bipartisan way. In particular, the report coming out of the House Armed Services Committee was a 57-2 vote, so that showed the two sides agreeing on the final package. Then there's always some amendments and things that cause it to maybe some people to get upset they didn't get their amendment, or some amendment happened that they didn't like. So it narrows a little bit, but it still was a very strong bipartisan vote on the House floor. So I thought that was exceptionally good news, and certainly in a district that has Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill, and a state that also then, in addition to those two, has the Vance Air Force Base and Enid and Altus Air Force Base and McAllister Ammunition Depot. This is extraordinarily important for Oklahoma. This legislation would touch on each one of those installations and the weapons systems that they manage and maintain. So big deal. So that was the good news. Second, we managed to get through our appropriations process at the committee level. There are 12 bills that fund the United States government. We passed one of them. We had 9 done before the August break. We passed one of them last week, along with what's called energy and water across the floor. And then we got the last 2, which are both consequential and controversial. The what's called the Labor, Health, and Human Services Education Bill, or Labor H. And then in addition to that, Commerce, Science, and Justice. It funds those 3 departments. That would include like the National Weather Center in Norman. So these were big bills that got through. Now again, we still have to work with the Senate, come together as a package. It's got to go to the president. There's a lot of steps, but all the basic committee work in the House is now done for all these bills. Senate is doing better than it does, and I really want to tip my hat to Senator Collins, who's the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, my counterpart there, and to John Thune, who's the majority leader, who's actually putting bills on the floor. They're working things through. We've gotten more across the floor and more out of committee, but they've never been this far along for many years, and they're moving, and we're working well together. So you actually see Congress doing very serious substantive work, and that's again, couldn't be much better. I want to give a shout out to my colleague Stephanie Bice. She got a very important piece of immigration legislation across the floor today. Today is Thursday, on September the 11th, and it was to enhance our ability to punish people that enter the country illegally and have been here before illegally and have committed crimes. I mean, it's a very, adds really powerful set of tools to law enforcement. Stephanie worked really hard on that bill. It's a standalone bill. It's her piece of work, and very proud to see that success for her. So again, Congress ground through its work and did very, very well. Important defense legislation, all the committee work on the appropriations legislation done. Other things, we also voted to go to conference with the Senate on 3 of our appropriations bills. Now again, the Senate hasn't agreed to conference yet, but we haven't had that vote since the 115th Congress. This is the 119th Congress that we actually were able to get enough agreement to do that. It was done on a voice vote in cooperation with the Democrats. So again, bipartisan, nobody trying to jam anybody. These are important procedural steps. They're important confidence building steps back and forth. I will tell you, we had this week our first formal meeting, or what are called the Big Four appropriators. That's the top, the chairman and what are known as the ranking members meeting to talk about process. What can we do to avoid a government shutdown on September 30th? And so right now there's negotiation going on what's called a continuing resolution. You'll hear the word CR that we would try to pass next week. We would also try to attach to that 3 of the appropriations bills that would be permanent for the whole next year. That would include military construction and veterans affairs, very important bill because it takes care of our veterans and our military construction all around the world for the next year. We'd also try and pass the agricultural bill. This is the basic funding bill. It's not the once every 5-year big ag bill, but very important. And then we do what's called ledge branch, which is just the basic operations of Congress in both the House and the Senate. And if we were able to attach one or all 3 of those bills to a continuing resolution, you'd literally fund the government in the area of the bills for the next year, and then the CR would keep the government running for a specified period of time. We do have an agreement amongst the appropriators to extend government operations to, I think, November the 21st. But, our leadership on each side has to sign off. My leadership on the Republican side basically has. And we're working closely with the White House, which also wants a continuing resolution. The last thing that the Trump administration wants is a shutdown. We don't want to shut down. We hope our Democratic friends and colleagues don't want to shut down either. There's nothing good that will come out of a shutdown for anybody, in my opinion. So we're working very closely. The White House would actually like to keep the government going through at least the first several weeks of next year. That's a possibility. I think it's more likely we'll do something shorter. So we keep members working together. We keep moving other packages of bills forward. But one way or the other, we'll have a vote probably next week to try and avoid all the drama of a potential September 30th shutdown. So I feel good about it. Again, a lot of moving parts, a lot of good things happening. Wish they happened sooner, faster, and better, but it's a pretty contentious time in Washington, D.C. But I will tell you, it was a very good week, certainly on the House side and certainly in terms of appropriations and national defense. Let me talk about 2 other things that happened. One, an immediate, unexpected tragedy yesterday. I wouldn't expect everybody that listens to this to know, but there's a gentleman by the name of Charlie Kirk, who's a very prominent conservative activist, college-age organizer. I mean, he's in his 31, 32, but focused on organizing young people, have been very successful at that, very well known in conservative and Republican circles, and I think Democrats, frankly, you respect the players on the other team even when you don't agree with them. And Charlie was, who I never met, but saw on television and in videos many times, was an engaging guy. He liked to talk. He liked to engage with people of every point of view. Was famous for going on college campuses and getting conservative organizations set up on campuses. That's a hard thing to do in this day and era. Campuses tend to lean to the left. But he engaged all the time and was at one of those campuses in the state of Utah and honestly was assassinated. I mean, he had his little girl with him. He had 2 young children, a young wife. Again, he's only 30 years old. I can't imagine what that family is going through. He literally was just having a discussion and some assassin from a great distance shot him. And couldn't help but bring back the memories 2 assassination attempts of our current president. I served with a person who somebody tried to assassinate, and that's our chief majority leader in the United States House of Representatives, Steve Scalise, who nearly bled to death. And frankly, if he hadn't had a security team that engaged the assassin, there were a bunch of other congressmen. It was at a baseball game or practice for the congressional baseball game. They would have all been killed. That does make you think about things. Presidential assassinations, now this, what happened to Steve. The violence that's going on in our culture is just unacceptable. We can have differences of opinion, but what we can't have are people taking the law into their own hand or engaging in violence. It's un-American, it's unacceptable. I think it's made members of Congress very reflective. We had a couple of Democratic state legislators, one of whom was murdered with her husband in her home a few weeks ago. Another again, Democratic legislator and his spouse that were nearly killed. They were shot multiple times. They were lucky to be alive. The thought that things like that are happening routinely up and down the political ladder, so to speak, from the president down to local officials, is just sobering, tragic, and I hope people think about some of the harsh things that are said about people that have different set of beliefs, and that sort of thing. You can have all the differences in the world, and politics is a rough and tumble business, but you need to think twice about using languages that encourages this sort of thing. So when people are called communists that aren't communists, or fascists that aren't fascists, or Nazis, or things like that, and there's plenty of blame to go around. I don't point fingers at one side or the other. I've heard bad language, things on each side directed at the other side. Deranged people listen to that sort of stuff and act on it. And so we've just got to be a little bit more civil and respectful with one another. And frankly, we need to uniformly condemn violence when it occurs and it's directed at anybody. We had, there's another case where a young white woman that was a Ukrainian refugee was murdered a few weeks ago, and I think it was in North Carolina, and by a person that should have never been released, had multiple things. It was a heinous crime, a stabbing, a knife attack, but the guy's obviously mentally deranged, should have been either institutionalized or jailed based on his criminal record, and wasn't. And now this young woman, who totally innocent and who came to the United States legally as a refugee to seek safety, is murdered in our country. Those are things that have got to stop, and that's partly better security and better law enforcement, but there's got to be a change in the violence associated with our culture, and particularly our politics. But it's through our culture. We have these awful school shootings and things of that nature. We just had one in Minnesota. A couple of young children literally murdered while they were praying in a Catholic school. So I say these things to raise this and hope that you think about them, and that we all do what we can to discourage them, and we all review our language and our behavior to make sure that we don't inadvertently contribute to something like that, create an atmosphere where anybody thinks that's acceptable, or where people that frankly aren't well balanced, it sparks them to do something that otherwise might not happen if we use more temperate language and showed more respect for one another, even when we disagree. Finally, even more sobering than that, I'm talking to you from the 24th anniversary of 9/11, or on that anniversary. And I'm in Washington, D.C. That's where I was 24 years ago. I was a senior political advisor for the United States Chamber of Commerce its headquarters is situated directly across Lafayette Park, looking on to the White House. And we were convening at 9 o'clock in the morning, the senior chamber leadership and consultants, and I was one of those guys, and we were sitting, and the current president was actually the chief of staff. Current president of the Chamber of Commerce was the chief of staff then. Her name was Suzanne Clark, and we'd have a conference around the table, and somebody stuck their head in the door and said, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center. And so television was brought in. We turned it on just in time to see the second plane crash into the second tower. And within a few minutes, we could see smoke coming up from the Pentagon. This is a fourth-story office, again, looking onto the White House and out over the Potomac. And then we could see people running out of the White House, some of whom I knew. George Bush was president. I knew the political staff over there, having been the chief of staff of the Republican National Committee during that election. I could see people running for their lives because they thought that the White House or the Capitol were targeted. And they were right to be thinking that. You know, unknown to all of us on the ground, there was a life and death struggle going on in the skies over Pennsylvania as people on a doomed flight figured out that their people that had taken over the plane were suicide terrorists and were taking them all, and they fought back, and they all died, but they brought that plane down, which otherwise, we don't know for sure. We don't know if the target was the White House or the Capitol building. I personally think it was probably the Capitol building because that's an easier target to hit. It's immediately visible from the air. But it makes you think about what a dangerous world we live in. And again, how lucky we are to be Americans, a citadel of freedom around the world. So a lot of sober reflection in Washington, D.C. There are still members of Congress that were in Congress at the time. I was not, but certainly some good. And they talk about what it was like to be on the floor, to be in the, as the news broke, and they literally knew there was a jetliner headed for Washington, D.C., and headed probably for the building that they were all in. And of course, thousands of staffers around the complex. So I say all that to just, remember we do live in a dangerous world. Thank the men and women that are in our security forces, our military, our intelligence people, our border security people, our just regular police officers and firefighters, all of whom performed with incredible heroism that day. I think particularly in New York, firefighters going into those buildings to get people out. Hundreds of those firefighters, of course, never got out of those buildings alive themselves. And they knew they were going into an extraordinarily dangerous situation, and yet they did it. It saved a lot of lives as respect while they lost their own. One of the gentlemen that died there I'd actually met in the Oklahoma City bombing. He was the captain of the New York firefighters association, or police, and they were in the buildings. And so a very somber day, a day to remember with gratitude the men and women that protect and serve us without a second thought, that put themselves between us and harm's way. At the drop of a hat, we have lots of Americans that do that for us every day. If you have a chance and you see one, thank them. Just say, appreciate what you do for us, officer, or whoever it is, or soldier, or sailor, or Marine, or Coast Guard person, or Air Force person. Just thank them because every day they make sure that we remember these days as unusual and years ago because they, day in and day out, get the job done for us. So again, I reflect a lot today, and number one, how fortunate I am to not have to experience what my friend Steve Scalise went through, what the President of the United States went through, what others have gone through, and largely because there are people out there that have protected the public events. When I do a town hall meeting or a chamber questionnaire in Oklahoma, we almost always have local police officers that show up. They want to make sure everything's okay, nobody's in danger, that if we have a dialogue or a debate, that it's done civilly where nobody threatens one another. And they do a fantastic job of that. And I have a wife that has MS. A lot of you know that at home. Occasionally she falls. Firefighters come right away. We just call them and help her get up and make sure that everything's okay. So we're all blessed to have men and women like that in our lives. And we certainly ought to think about it on a day like 9/11. And we ought to think about it on a day where any American goes through what the late Mr. Kirk went through and his family is going through right now. Unacceptable to happen. Thank goodness we have people that try to make sure it happens as seldom as possible and are willing to run enormous risks so you and I can move around in safety and security and in freedom. So just some random thoughts on a day that marked a good week for Congress, one where your institutions that I know are frustrating to watch actually function pretty well. I'm very proud of my committee for getting its work done, and hopefully now the Congress can go on, build on that. We can avoid a government shutdown and certainly move forward. And again, very thoughtful about the men and women that protect us, because we've seen an tragic incident where that didn't work out, and that's not the security people's fault. That's whoever did it to this promising young man and his family. And then, again, think about our own national perspective, and things that happened 24 years ago happen a lot more frequently in a lot of countries around the world because they don't have the level of security that we have. They don't have the infrastructure of men and women that, again, from our police forces to our military forces to our first responders that protect us in natural disasters or man-made disasters. So with that, I think a lot about you and your family, just I think about me and my family, and because I'm very privileged to represent some of you in the United States Congress. I appreciate the honor, and let's just all remember with gratitude the men and women that make sure this society hangs together, functions, and is for the most part safe and secure. So good luck, God bless, and we'll talk to you again next week.